I'm happy to welcome you to this session where the researchers of the team, the EMoBookTrade team, will all present their papers. I feel really privileged to have the opportunity to present you this incredible group of young scholars, really excellent, who will really develop the project in the next years. Some of them already started in our research and will present the results of their work so far, and some others will join us in the next future. And so they will talk about what they are presently finishing and what led them to develop interest in this project. I propose we'll keep our questions at the end of this session so that all speakers may have their time and maybe some general question about the project can raise. And I'd like to introduce immediately our first speaker, Dr. Goran Proot, who obtained his PhD in language and literature at the University of Antwerp with a thesis about Jesuit theater in the southern Netherlands. He has been director of the short title catalog Flanders project, a major bibliographical project documenting hand-press books published in Flanders. He is editor-in-chief of the book historical journal, the Gulden Passer, and he is president of the Flanders Book Historical Society. He has worked as a curator of rare books at Antwerp University Library. In 2012, he became Andrew W. Mellon Curator of Rare Books at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. In 2014, he moved to the Bibliothèque Mazarine in Paris, where he directed the Digital Library and the Conservation Lab. On 1st November 2016, he joined the EMoBookTrade project, and during the coming years, he will survey book prizes in the archives of Plantin, Moretus in Antwerp. Thank you. Would you start?
Thank you very much, Angela. Signore e signori, the papers conserved at the Museum Plantin Moretus run from the middle of the 16th century until 1865. 1,382 ledgers, 990 bundles, 187 parcels, and more than 1,385 parchment items document more than 3 centuries of activity by Christopher Plantin and his successors, the Moretuses. Amongst those papers, there is a number of contemporary production lists initiated by Plantin and continued by Jan Moretus I. Those production lists give an overview of a large portion of the actual production by their presses year by year. In addition to bibliographic information such as the names of authors, titles, and bibliographical format, the entries in those lists often include information about the number of sheets, the print run, and, important for our early modern book trade project, prices. In this paper, I will concentrate on the question what we can learn from them. Now, before I start, 2 points should be made clear. First, all prices referred to in the following minutes are fixed by Plantin or Jan Moretus I for the sale of unbound books. So they're all unbound. Whether or not those prices were realized in practice, that is, in wholesale or retail transactions, on credit or in cash, is another question with which we will deal on another occasion. Second, all prices mentioned in my talk are in Carolus guilders or florins, which are divided into 20 stivers. So I will say florijnen for florins and stuivers for stivers. This is all the same, but they're always Carolus guilders. There are 2 production lists with book prices fixed by Plantin and his successor, Jan Moretus I. Jan Moretus I was Plantin's son-in-law, who was in charge of the firm The Golden Compasses from 1589 onwards, the year Christopher died until 1610, when he in turn passed away. The oldest production list on your right, M321, runs from 1580 until 1655, and the other one, M39, was started under Jan Moretus' management in 1589. This list as well was continued until the mid-17th century, and in contrast to M321, it also indicates print runs. Both lists are arranged in chronological order. The information in those production lists may be completed by other documents, such as the two contemporary handwritten book catalogues known as M164 and M296. Both catalogues are organized in alphabetical order because they were used to look up prices of books for clients. For this paper, I concentrated on the oldest production list, M321, and analyzed the book prices from 1580 until 1610. And in addition to titles and authors, this document mentions, in most cases, bibliographical formats, the number of sheets of a copy, and the price. And in later years, the compilers of the production list frequently add details about illustrations in the books and paper stocks used for their production. Not all books coming off the presses are mentioned in this source. Omitted are the ordinances for the city of Antwerp and other commissioned works, probably because the copies were not intended for the regular market. In some cases, different sources mention different prices or different numbers of sheets. And in case of doubt, this information was compared to other sources, including the magnificent bibliographies of Plantin's book production by Leon Voet, and about the production by his successor Jan Moretus, the bibliography by Dirk Imhoff. In the end, I left out about 8% of all the entries, causing confusion, leaving us a very large and reliable set of serial data. Just 2 slides to show you some difficulties I encountered, differences in prices in the different sources, or differences in numbers of sheets, and because they affect the results, I left them out. Let's now have a look at the results. The first graph breaks down editions by bibliographical format and gives the average price for a copy in this format. It shows how works in folio and in quarto are the most expensive ones. So those books nominally have the highest prices. The differences between books in octavo, duodecimo, sedecimo, and 24mo are less dramatic. I blurred the information about 18mos and 32mos because those groups are too small to use in a statistic way. It's worth noting that the lowest average price is for 16mos, a bibliographic format which became popular among printers after the 1540s. This is the average price for an actual copy, but for most books it's also possible to calculate the price per sheet, and this graph holds several surprises. It shows that smaller book formats are not necessarily cheaper than larger ones. Folios and quartos are, again, relatively expensive. Octavo books, and books in 16mo are much cheaper, indeed, but books in duodecimo are half that size, in 24mo are not, and I will come back to the latter category in a few minutes. The following graph shows the actual ticket for books by period. The first bar here on the left represents 6 years, the others each time 5 years, so I grouped the data. There is a significant rise in price from 1595 onwards. In comparison with the preceding period, the average price doubled, and in later years, prices went up even more. The books for sale in the shop of Jan Moretus become all the time more expensive. And at the same time, the relative price per sheet increases as well. And this time the rise is noticeable from the 1590s onwards. So it all the time goes up. So this is the same information on this graph, but here I've broken down the rise of prices, the price per sheet by year. So it's incremental by year. Now let me discuss the two spikes here. There are two spikes. The first spike, 1591, is mainly due to a lavishly illustrated edition of Ovidius's Metamorphoses, an expensive prayer book, and some other books with intaglio illustrations. More heavily illustrated devotional books like the Officium Beatae Mariae Virginis and a collection of litanies were published in 1595, the second spike, along with a publication on the occasion of the entry of Archduke Ernest. The latter publication in folio was sumptuously illustrated as well, and its price was fixed at 5 florins. The price evolution observed in the production lists corresponds with the increase of workmen's wages in the 16th century in Antwerp. Here we see wages of mason laborers, carpenters, and masons, and they're all indicated in Brabant groots here and compared with the price for a book counting 10 sheets. If I took one sheet, you wouldn't see anything because it would be too little on the graph, so I multiplied by 10 for 10 sheets. So in all three graphs, the price of books parallels wages. Now, in order better to understand differences in price, I looked more closely at two categories, at folios and 24mos, two expensive categories of books. And so what you see here is the folios, and here printers, publishers will give, and in the 24mos they will take. Between 1589 and 1610, Jan Moretus I published 20 volumes of Cesare Baronio's Annales Ecclesiastici. In this period, some volumes were reprinted, such as volumes 2 and 3, and volume 1 was even published 3 times. All of them were published with an engraved title page and with 1 or 2 additional engravings, or intaglios. Over a period of 20 years, the price per sheet slowly increased, as you can see here, thus following the overall trend and the rise of laborer wages in Antwerp. The nominal price of the bulky volumes fluctuated between 100 stivers, or 5 florins, as you can see here, and 140 stivers, or 7 florins, for the most expensive ones. So there is a price range for each of those volumes, and it's always between the 100 and 120, with 2 exceptions. What you see is that the price for the first volume increased as well, from 110 stivers in 1589 to 120 stivers 7 years later. And the third time they published the same volume, so it's the same content, in 1610, they maintained the price. In relative terms, however, the price was far, far from stable. When recalculated as stivers per sheet, the price of this volume increased with about 10% each time it was reprinted. Now, the next graph makes clear that this is not a straightforward strategy. For some volumes, the price per sheet increased, and for others, it dropped. It helps to look at volumes 10 and 12 to understand how Jan Moretus went about the prices of the individual volumes of this church history. So here are volumes 10 and 12. And with 140 stivers, or 7 florins, the price in the shop was much higher than for the other volumes. But in relative terms, they were amongst the cheapest. In fact, customers could purchase very fat tomes at relatively cheap conditions. So, and this makes clear that there's more to fixing a price than the number of sheets and the cost of living. For most volumes, first and later editions, the price in the shop was either 110 or 120 stivers. And Jan Moretus rounded off prices accordingly. So thinner volumes, which would have cost less, were marked up, and fatter tomes, which would have cost more, much more, were offered at a relatively low ticket. There was clearly the intention to maintain a coherent price for all volumes, and ups and downs were rounded down and up. So there's a sort of regression to the middle, if you wish. Now the category of 24mos confirms that sale prices are not linked to production cost only. As I have demonstrated before, the price per sheet of those little booklets, now, and this is very funny because I say little booklets and it's as big as Baronio's folio edition, but in reality it's only 10 centimeters high. So as I demonstrated before, the price per sheet of those little booklets is amongst the highest. The first graph shows the price per sheet for each one of the in total 67 24mo editions published between 1580 and 1610. And the overall trend goes up also for the cheapest editions, so again following income. So I dotted in green the cheapest 24mos. This graph also shows a great number of editions with much higher prices per sheet, up to 1 stiver per sheet and more. This concerns book printed in red and black. So this is so the books are so small that they even disappear. So here are the red dots are the books printed in red and black. And the so-called rubro nigri, and they are more expensive than books printed in black only because each bicolored sheet has to go under the press twice. So more wages and more ink. All books in question are liturgical or devotional books, such as books of hours, litanies, and prayer books. And many of them are also illustrated with intaglio, so copper engravings or etchings. This involves the work of artists for the design of the illustration, skilled art engravers for the execution in copper, and the intervention of specialized printers who dispose of an intaglio press. And even Plantin and Moretus outsourced that work mostly because it's really a specialization. So needless to say that this kind of books required an extra investment on behalf of the publisher, but in most cases, the publisher substantially marked up sale prices as well. The Officium Beatae Mariae Virginis 24mo edition, published by Jan Moretus in 1601, can serve as a good example, because it is so well documented and described in detail in Dirk Imhoff's bibliography. This small prayer book was published in 2 separate issues, one issue with 29 woodcut illustrations and another one with 32 intaglios. Both issues count 11.5 sheets per copy, and the woodcut version is printed on a run of 3,000 copies, and the intaglio version of the book on a run of 2,000 copies. So combined 5,000 copies, 2 different issues. The price for an unbound copy illustrated with woodcuts is 6 stivers. The intaglio version is twice as much. In this case, the production cost both for the engraving of the 32 copper plates and for their impression is documented in detail. And according to the account books present in the archives of the Museum Plantin Moretus, Theodor Galle was paid 69 florins and 10 stivers for the engravings and 105 florins for the impressions of the copies. This amounts to an extra production cost of 174 florins and 10 stivers. So this is a great sum. Divided over a run of 2,000 copies, however, this is 1.75 stivers per copy. And yet, in comparison with the woodcut version, the price was raised not by 2 stivers or 3 stivers, but it was doubled with 6 stivers. It is clear that Jan Moretus I added what I would like to call, what I would like to call now, let's say, an intaglio bonus, okay, to this kind of editions. Frequently, not always, the price of the intaglio variants was simply doubled. The fact that he maintained this strategy throughout the entire career, his entire career, indicates that the public accepted to pay the extra money. In contrast to the Baronius editions, Jan Moretus seems to have taken more systematically advantage of this feature of his editions. The inclusion of intaglios was not only beneficial to the aura of his firm, but also to the volume of his business. Moving to the production of more expensive books was in that respect twice profitable. The previous examples may suggest that we know everything about the production of books by Plantin and his successors, but that's not the case. The calculation of all elements of the production cost, for example, is not so easy as it seems to be. So in addition to the easy elements such as the price of paper, the wages, the compositors, and so on, there's a wide variety of additional elements, and the cost of which is difficult to determine. And in his chapter about costing, Léon Voet writes that Plantin used to count with what I would like to call a sort of overhead cost, which may be between 20 and 25% of the known production cost. So sometimes it was less, sometimes more, but we don't know. It's somewhere out there. At any rate, it is safe to depart from the maximum discount rates Plantin and Jan Moretus worked with. It's a matter of common sense that the discounts they gave would not consume their entire profit on a book. And they would, in wholesale, they would work with price cuts of about 25% for red and black titles and 40% for other books. And yet there are more aspects of both Plantin's and Jan Moretus' book production remaining under the surface. The production lists as well as the account books make clear that there were frequently 2 variants of one edition. As I have discussed before, a part of the run, and sometimes this is really a small part of the run, only 25 or 50 copies, received intaglio illustrations instead of woodcuts. So like in this example, so on top of the page, or further down in the volume, here in the middle of the page. You can see the difference here in the 9th tome of Baronius Annales. Moreover, the papers in the museum also indicate the existence of copies printed on better paper, Now, I went to the museum to check this out, and it's almost impossible to see it. And I asked Dirk Imhoff also about it, and he said, well, perhaps at the time you could see it fairly easily, but nowadays it's very difficult in many cases. When small parts of the runs are involved, the archival sources do not always mention different prices for those copies on better paper or with intaglios. And it may be that they were set aside those luxurious copies to serve as presentation copies, or that they were preferably sold to good clients or customers with, I don't know, bibliophile interest. At this point, we don't know. And it's certainly one of the many things we have to keep in mind in the course of our project. I would like to conclude with 4 points about this preliminary survey. If unreliable data is filtered out, production lists can serve as a fairly reliable source better to understand selling prices. Those data collections can serve as a backdrop for the analysis of actual transactions between publisher and customers in wholesale or retail transactions, locally or farther away. And this is for the future, so to look at the sales. Over time, prices evolve even on the basic level of the printed sheet. But the number of printed sheets required to print a copy is not the only factor which determines the price of a book. The presence of different colors and of illustrations in relief or in intaglio also have an impact on prices, and especially the inclusion of intaglio illustrations raises the value of books, and that value is not only determined by factual production costs. The existence of variant editions or of issues with distinctive features may or may not have an impact on what price is recorded in the books, be it in the sales at the shop in Antwerp or the transactions with other professionals as recorded in the Journal or the Cahiers de Francfort. Those are the reasons why the analysis of prices should begin with the accumulation of reliable serial data, and in a second time the results of this project may be refined through the analysis of individual cases, but always against the backdrop of the overall trends. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Proot, for this outstanding talk.